The dust of the trail coated everything Caleb Keane owned, from his weathered boots to the brim of his once black Stetson, now the color of the Montana Territory itself. April 1876 marked 2 years since he'd buried his wife beneath the cottonwood tree on their homestead, and 6 months since the old cook who'd kept him fed had succumbed to pneumonia during the first frost of winter. The rancher guided his horse down the main street of Silverpine, his cattle sold and money in his pocket, but the hollowness inside him remained unfilled. What good was success when there was no one waiting at home? The wind carried the scent of fresh bread from a small establishment at the end of the street, a modest wooden structure with a hand-painted sign, Thornton's Bakery and Meals. Caleb's stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since dawn. He'd planned to just grab supplies and head back to his ranch, but the aroma pulled at him like a physical force. He tied his horse at the hitching post and pushed through the door, the small bell above it announcing his arrival. Inside, a woman with auburn hair pinned loosely at the nape of her neck worked dough at a table. She glanced up, her hands never stopping their rhythmic kneading. "Sit anywhere you like. I'll be with you in a moment," she said, her voice carrying the slight lilt of somewhere back east. Caleb removed his hat and selected a small table near the window, watching as the woman finished her task, wiped her hands on her apron, and approached. "What can I get for you, sir?" she asked. "Whatever's hot," he replied, his voice rough from disuse. She studied him for a moment, taking in the trail dust, the hollow cheeks beneath his beard, and the emptiness in his eyes that matched her own. "You look like you could use more than just a meal," she observed. Caleb shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. "Just passing through. Sold my cattle. Heading back to my ranch tomorrow." She nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear.
"I'm Tabitha Keller."
"This is my place." "Caleb Keane," he replied, offering nothing more. "Well, Mr. Keane, I'll feed you till you smile again," she said with a determination that caught him off guard. "It might take more than one meal, but I consider it a personal challenge." For the first time in months, Caleb felt something stir within him, not quite amusement, but something close to interest. "You'd be wasting your time, Mrs. Keller," he said, noticing the simple gold band on her finger. "Miss Keller," she corrected. "Well, Mrs., but my husband's been gone 3 years now, and I've got nothing but time." Her green eyes held his for a moment before she turned toward the kitchen. "Let me get you that meal." Caleb watched her disappear behind the curtain that separated the dining area from the kitchen. He hadn't intended to reveal anything about himself to anyone in town, but something about Tabitha Keller made him speak again when she returned with a steaming bowl of stew and fresh bread. "Lost my wife 2 years back. Fever took her," he said as she placed the food before him. "The old fella who cooked for the ranch hands and me passed last winter. Been eating my own cooking since." "And how's that working out for you?" she asked, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. Caleb looked down at the stew, the rich aroma making his mouth water. "Let's just say the coyotes won't even steal it." She laughed then, a sound so unexpected and musical that it startled them both. "Enjoy your meal, Mr. Keane. There's apple pie for after if you've got room." The stew was the best thing Caleb had eaten in months. The meat tender, the vegetables flavorful, the broth rich without being heavy. The bread, still warm from the oven, practically melted in his mouth. He found himself slowing down, savoring each bite rather than just fueling his body as had become his habit. When Tabitha returned to check on him, he was sopping up the last of the gravy with a piece of bread. "I'll take that pie now," he said, and she nodded pleased. "You still haven't smiled," she noted as she brought the generous slice, topped with a dollop of cream. "Guess you'll have to try harder tomorrow," he found himself saying, the words out before he could stop them. Her eyebrows raised in surprise. "You planning to come back, then?" Caleb realized he was. The thought of another meal like this one, and perhaps more conversation with this direct, no-nonsense woman, suddenly seemed worth delaying his return to the ranch by a day. "Might be I need to pick up a few more supplies before heading back," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Might be," she agreed, and he caught the hint of satisfaction in her tone. The next morning found Caleb back at Thornton's for breakfast. The place was busier, with several tables occupied by townsfolk. Tabitha moved efficiently between the kitchen and dining area, serving plates of eggs, bacon, and flapjacks. She spotted him and nodded toward an empty table in the corner. "Coffee?" she asked as he settled in, and he nodded gratefully. Over the next 2 days, Caleb found reasons to stay in Silverpine. He replenished supplies he didn't really need, had his horse reshod though the shoes were still sound, and took all his meals at Thornton's. Each time, Tabitha would bring him hearty, flavorful food, exchange a few words, and remind him that her challenge remained unmet. On the third morning, as he savored her sourdough pancakes drizzled with maple syrup, she paused at his table. "You're avoiding going home," she observed, refilling his coffee cup. Caleb looked up, momentarily defensive, then let his shoulders slump. "Nothing to go home to except work and memories." "I understand that better than most," she said quietly. "When Robert died, I couldn't bear to stay in our house. Too many ghosts. That's why I came west and opened this place. Needed something that was mine alone." "Seems you've done well for yourself," he commented, glancing around the tidy establishment. "Most days," she agreed. "But running a business alone is hard work. My helper quit last month to get married." Caleb found himself saying, "I should head back today. Got cattle to tend to, fences to mend." A flash of disappointment crossed her face, quickly masked. "Of course. Your ranch won't run itself." She hesitated, then added, "You're welcome back anytime, Mr. Keane, for a meal or conversation." "Caleb," he corrected, surprising himself again. "Caleb," she repeated, and somehow his name sounded different when she said it. He paid for his breakfast and left a generous tip, lingering by the counter. "Thank you, Miss Keller. Best meals I've had in a long while." "Tabitha," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "And you still haven't smiled, so my challenge stands." Caleb touched the brim of his hat. "Maybe next time." The trail back to his ranch felt longer than usual, the silence more oppressive. The house stood just as he'd left it, sturdy, well-built, and utterly empty. He unsaddled his horse, stored his supplies, and walked through rooms that echoed with his solitary footsteps. That night, as he ate a tasteless meal of beans and hardtack, Caleb found himself thinking of Tabitha's cooking, but more than that, of her determined green eyes and the way she'd seen straight through his defenses. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of ranch work. Spring meant calving season, mending winter damage to fences and buildings, and preparing for the summer months ahead. Caleb threw himself into the labor, working from dawn until well after dusk, exhausting himself in hopes of dreamless sleep. But thoughts of Tabitha Keller persistently intruded. He found himself wondering what she might be baking that day, or if her business was thriving, or who was eating her food now that he had returned to his solitary existence. On the 15th day, as he repaired a section of fencing, the decision crystallized in his mind. He would ride into Silverpine the next day. Just for supplies, he told himself, though the list of what he actually needed was short. The following morning, Caleb took extra care with his appearance, trimming his beard and donning a clean shirt before saddling his horse for the journey to town. The spring air carried the scent of wildflowers, and he found himself noticing the beauty of the landscape in a way he hadn't for years. Thornton's was busy when he arrived, the lunch crowd filling most tables. Caleb hesitated in the doorway, scanning the room for Tabitha. He spotted her emerging from the kitchen, plates balanced expertly on her arms. She delivered them to a table of miners, then turned and saw him. The smile that lit her face caused an unexpected warmth to spread through his chest. "You're back," she said, approaching him with undisguised pleasure. Needed supplies, he replied, though they both knew it for the excuse it was. Well, you look like you could use a meal first. Your usual table is open. As he settled in, Caleb realized he had a usual table here, despite having only visited for 3 days. Somehow, Tabitha had carved out a space for him in her establishment and in her routine. The thought was both comforting and unsettling. She brought him beef stew and fresh bread, much like his first meal there, but this time accompanied by a small dish of pickled vegetables. Made these last fall, she explained. Thought they might complement the stew. They did, the tangy crispness providing a perfect contrast to the rich meat and gravy. Caleb ate with genuine enjoyment, watching the efficient way Tabitha managed her busy restaurant. She moved with grace and purpose, greeting customers by name, addressing concerns with calm authority, all while maintaining the quality of the food and service. As the lunch crowd thinned, she finally took a seat across from him, a cup of coffee in her hands. So, how's the ranch? She asked. Standing, he replied. Spring's always busy. Calving, repairs, preparing for summer grazing. You manage all that alone. Got 2 hands who help with the cattle. Do most of the rest myself. She nodded, understanding. And the cooking? A rueful expression crossed his face. Still scaring off the coyotes. Tabitha laughed, that musical sound he'd remembered during his time away. You know, she said, her tone casual but her eyes intent. I've been thinking about your situation. Have you now? He asked, curious despite himself. I could use help here, especially with the baking. Morning prep starts before dawn, and I'm running myself ragged trying to do everything. She took a sip of her coffee, watching him over the rim of the cup. And you need someone who can cook a decent meal. Caleb's brow furrowed. What exactly are you proposing? A business arrangement, she said promptly. I could come out to your ranch twice a week. Cook several meals in advance that you could reheat. Bake bread, pies, whatever you need. In exchange, you could help me here on those days chopping wood, making repairs, heavy lifting. Things I struggle with. The offer caught him completely off guard. It was practical, addressed both their needs, and yet. It's a full day's ride round trip, he pointed out. I have a wagon, she countered. Could stay overnight, get an early start back the next day. You must have an extra room. The thought of having someone having her in his house again after so long alone was both appealing and terrifying. Why would you do this? He asked, genuinely bewildered. Tabitha set down her cup and looked at him directly. Because I know what it's like to be alone and drowning in work. Because good food should be more than just fuel. And because. She hesitated, then continued more softly. Because in the 3 days you were here, I enjoyed our conversations more than any I've had in years. Her honesty stripped away his defenses. I've thought about your cooking every day since I left, he admitted. And not just the food. Color rose in her cheeks, but she held his gaze steadily. So, is it an arrangement? Caleb considered the proposal. It was unconventional, would certainly raise eyebrows, but he found he didn't care about that. When would you start? I'm closed Mondays and Tuesdays. Could leave Monday morning, return Tuesday evening. Would that work? It would, he agreed, surprising himself with how much he wanted this arrangement to succeed. Good, she said, standing to clear his empty plate. I'll see you Monday then. Tabitha, he called as she turned away. When she looked back, he added, bring whatever you need for apple pie. The corners of her mouth lifted. Still trying to make you smile, Mr. Keane. Monday morning arrived clear and mild. Caleb had spent the weekend cleaning the house with an intensity that startled his ranch hands. The spare bedroom, and used for years, was aired out, the sheets fresh, the furniture dusted. The kitchen, too, received special attention, its surfaces scrubbed and utensils organized. He rode into town to meet Tabitha, planning to guide her wagon back to the ranch. She was waiting outside her establishment, loading the final items into a well-maintained wagon hitched to a sturdy bay horse. "Morning," she greeted him, securing a crate of what appeared to be cooking implements. "Morning," he replied, dismounting to help her. "Looks like you're bringing your whole kitchen." "Just the essentials," she said with a small smile. "Some of these are for you to keep basics every kitchen needs." The journey to his ranch took most of the morning, the conversation flowing more easily than Caleb had expected. Tabitha told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, her marriage to Robert, a schoolteacher who died of tuberculosis, and her decision to move west and start fresh. "Robert always wanted to see the frontier," she explained. "Coming here felt like I was bringing a part of him with me, even as I was building something new for myself." Caleb found himself sharing in return about his years as a young cowboy, meeting his wife Sarah at a town dance, their dreams of building a cattle empire together, and the devastating fever that had taken her life just as their hard work was beginning to pay off. "She would have been proud of what you've built," Tabitha observed as they crested the final hill and the ranch came into view. The main house stood solid and imposing, constructed of logs and local stone. Behind it stretched several outbuildings, corrals, and in the distance, the vast grasslands where his cattle grazed. It was impressive, the result of 10 years of backbreaking labor and shrewd business decisions. "Doesn't mean much without someone to share it with," he said quietly. Tabitha's gaze was understanding but firm. "It means you honored the dreams you built together. That matters, Caleb." They arrived at the ranch house, and Caleb helped her down from the wagon. Their hands met, lingered for a moment longer than necessary, then parted as he led her inside. Tabitha's eyes widened as she took in the spacious main room with its stone fireplace and well-crafted furniture. "This is beautiful work," she said, running her hand along the mantelpiece. "Did you build this?" "Most of it," he acknowledged. "Had help with the stonework. Sarah designed the layout." She nodded, appreciating the skill and care evident in every detail. "Show me the kitchen?" The kitchen was large and functional, designed to feed ranch hands during busy seasons. Tabitha immediately began unpacking her supplies, arranging items with practiced efficiency. "I'll start with bread," she decided. "Then stew that can simmer while I make pies. By evening, you'll have enough food prepared to last several days." "What can I do?" Caleb asked, feeling suddenly out of place in his own kitchen. "Chop vegetables for the stew," she instructed, handing him a knife and several onions. "Then maybe show me around the ranch, if you have time." They worked side by side through the afternoon, the kitchen filling with delicious aromas as Tabitha transformed simple ingredients into mouth-watering meals. Caleb found himself watching her hands as they kneaded dough or crimped pie crust, mesmerized by their deft movements. Later, while stews and roasts simmered, he showed her the barns, the corrals where new calves stayed with their mothers, the vegetable garden Sarah had started that he still maintained. "You grow quite a variety," Tabitha observed, examining the neat rows of emerging seedlings. "Habit, I guess," he admitted. Sarah loved fresh vegetables. "Used to trade with neighbors for what we couldn't grow. Would you mind if I use some for your meals?" "Fresh herbs make all the difference." "Help yourself," he said, pleased by her interest. "Most goes to waste now." As the sun began to set, they returned to the house, where Tabitha put the finishing touches on dinner. They ate at the kitchen table, savoring the roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread while discussing plans for the following day. "I noticed your smokehouse is empty," she commented. "If you've got a ham or a side of bacon that needs smoking, I could help with that before I leave." "Been meaning to do that," Caleb acknowledged. "Just haven't made the time." After dinner, they moved to the main room, where Caleb built a fire against the evening chill. The conversation continued, touching on books they'd both read, news from back east, local happenings in Silverpine. It felt natural, comfortable in a way Caleb hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. When Tabitha finally yawned and stood to retire for the night, he realized they'd been talking for hours. "Breakfast at dawn?" she asked, pausing at the door to the spare room. "I'll have coffee ready," he promised. Caleb lay awake long after she'd gone to bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person moving about his house. The creak of floorboards, the soft closing of a door, small reminders that he wasn't alone. It should have felt intrusive after so long on his own, but instead, it was comforting. The next morning started early, with Caleb already at the stove when Tabitha emerged from her room. She looked momentarily surprised to find him cooking, then smiled appreciatively at the coffee he handed her. "You can handle coffee, at least," she teased, watching as he scrambled eggs with considerably less skill than he'd shown with ranch work. "Essentials only," he admitted. "Anything more complicated than eggs or bacon is beyond me." After breakfast, they tackled the smokehouse together. Caleb showed Tabitha how to prepare the meat while he got the fire started with hickory chips he'd been saving. The work was companionable, their movements falling into a natural rhythm as if they'd been working together for years. By midday, the smokehouse was filled with hams, sides of bacon, and even some fish Caleb had caught the previous week. The smoky aroma mingled with the scent of bread baking in the kitchen, creating a sense of home that had been missing for too long. As afternoon approached, Tabitha began preparing for her departure. She organized the foods she'd prepared labeled, with instructions for reheating, and packed her supplies back into the wagon. "Same time next week?" she asked as Caleb helped her load the last crate. "I'll be expecting you," he confirmed, surprising himself with how much he was already looking forward to her return. The following weeks established a pattern. Each Monday, Tabitha would arrive at the ranch, spend the day and night cooking, cleaning, and helping with whatever needed attention. Tuesdays were often devoted to special projects, making preserves from the garden's bounty, smoking meats, or teaching Caleb the basics of bread making. During her days in town, Caleb found reasons to visit Silverpine more frequently. He would take a meal at Thornton's, help with repairs or heavy lifting as they'd agreed, and stay for conversation long after the work was done. Townspeople noticed, of course. Gossip followed them, some of it kind, some less so. Neither of them paid it much mind, too focused on the growing connection between them to care what others thought. By the 6th week of their arrangement, the nature of their relationship had subtly shifted. Their conversations grew deeper, touches lingered longer, and the air between them seemed charged with unspoken feelings. It was during a thunderstorm in late June that everything changed. Tabitha had arrived at the ranch on Monday as usual, but by evening, the sky had darkened ominously. Rain fell in sheets, lightning splitting the sky with brilliant forks, making travel impossible. "You'll have to stay an extra night," Caleb said as they stood at the window, watching the storm rage. "Roads will be washed out by morning." "My customers," she began, concern creasing her brow. "Can survive one day without your cooking," he finished gently. "Better than you risking that wagon on muddy roads." Tabitha nodded, accepting the logic of his argument. "I suppose I could use the extra time to put up more of those green beans from your garden." The storm continued through the night and into the next day, confining them to the house. They spent the hours cooking, talking, and playing cards by the fire as rain drummed against the roof. There was an intimacy to their isolation, a sense that the world outside had fallen away, leaving only the two of them in this warm, fragrant space. That evening, as they sat before the fire, Tabitha broached a subject they'd been circling for weeks. "Caleb," she said, her voice soft but determined, "I think we should talk about what's happening between us." He looked up from the fire, his dark eyes reflecting the flames. "What do you think is happening?" "Something more than a business arrangement," she replied honestly. "At least, for me it is." Caleb set aside the piece of wood he'd been whittling and turned to face her fully. "For me too," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I didn't expect to feel this way again. Didn't think I could." "Neither did I," she confessed. "After Robert died, I thought that part of my life was over. I was content with my bakery, my independence. And now, he prompted when she fell silent. Now I find myself thinking about you when we're apart. Looking forward to Mondays not because I'll be cooking or helping around the ranch, but because I'll see you. The honesty of her words emboldened him. Caleb reached across the space between them and took her hand in his. I've been alone for 2 years, he said. Thought it was what I deserved, what Sarah would have wanted me keeping to myself, maintaining what we built. What do you think now? Tabitha asked, her fingers warm against his. I think she'd be the first to tell me I've been a fool, he said with a rueful shake of his head. Sarah wasn't one to hold with unnecessary suffering. She'd have said life's too short for that. She sounds like a wise woman. She was, Caleb agreed. And I think she would have liked you. Tabitha's expression softened. That might be the nicest thing you could have said. They sat in comfortable silence for several moments, hands still joined, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. I'm not sure what happens next, Caleb finally admitted. Been out of practice at this sort of thing for a long while. Tabitha's laugh was warm and understanding. We could start slowly, she suggested. Perhaps you could escort me to church on Sunday? Make things official in the eyes of the town. I'd like that, he said, squeezing her hand gently. Though it might disappoint some of the gossips who've been speculating about us for weeks. Let them talk, she said with a dismissive wave of her free hand. We know the truth of things. The storm cleared overnight, leaving behind freshly washed skies and muddy roads that delayed Tabitha's departure until Thursday morning. By then, they had reached a new understanding, their relationship acknowledged and embraced by both. Caleb rode into town that Sunday wearing his best suit, his boots polished to a shine. He collected Tabitha from her small house behind the bakery, offering her his arm as they walked to the white-clapboard church at the center of town. Their entrance together caused exactly the stir they'd expected: whispers, nudges, knowing looks exchanged between the townspeople. But the minister welcomed them warmly, and several of Tabitha's regular customers offered genuine smiles of approval. After the service, they walked slowly back toward her home, acknowledging greetings from passers-by with polite nods. Well, that's done it, Caleb observed dryly. By supper time, everyone in 3 counties will know we're courting. Does that bother you? Tabitha asked, a touch of uncertainty in her voice. Not in the slightest, he assured her, covering her hand where it rested in the crook of his elbow. I'm proud to be seen with you, Tabitha Keller. The summer progressed, their arrangement evolving with their relationship. Tabitha still came to the ranch on Mondays, but now she stayed through Wednesday, returning to town on Thursday mornings. Caleb spent his weekends in Silverpine, attending church with her on Sundays and helping with larger projects around her bakery. By August, the pattern had become so established that the absence of one from their usual place immediately sparked concern from those who knew them. When Tabitha missed a day at her bakery due to a summer cold, 6 customers showed up at her door with remedies. When Caleb was delayed returning from a cattle drive, the telegraph operator in Silverpine sent a message to the nearest town asking after him, knowing Tabitha would be worried. It was on a warm September evening, as they sat on the porch of his ranch house watching the sunset, that Caleb finally found the words he'd been searching for. I've been thinking, he began, his voice serious enough that Tabitha turned to look at him with concern. About what? She prompted when he didn't immediately continue. About us. This back and forth between the ranch and town. He took her hand, his calloused palm rough against her softer one. It's working, but it seems inefficient. Tabitha's expression grew guarded. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we could be more efficient, he said, then grimaced at his own words. That came out wrong. What I mean is, he took a deep breath, gathering his courage. I love you, Tabitha. Have for a while now. Was wondering if you might consider making this arrangement permanent. Her eyes widened as his meaning became clear. Are you proposing Caleb Keane? Trying to, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. Not doing a very good job of it, am I? You could be clearer, she agreed, but her eyes were dancing with suppressed laughter. Caleb stood, then knelt before her on one knee, still holding her hand. Tabitha Keller, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I can't promise it will always be easy, but I can promise you won't ever have to face hardship alone again. Tears welled in her eyes, but her smile was radiant. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will marry you. He rose and gathered her into his arms, their lips meeting in a kiss that sealed their promise to one another. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Caleb realized he was smiling a full, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Tabitha noticed it too. Well, she said, touching his cheek gently, looks like I've finally won my challenge. They were married in the Silverpine church on the first Sunday of October, with the entire town in attendance. Tabitha wore a simple ivory dress with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Caleb looked more at ease in his suit than anyone could remember seeing him. After the ceremony, they hosted a celebration at Thornton's, which would soon bear a new sign: Keane's Bakery and Meals. Tabitha had decided to keep the business, though she would split her time between town and ranch, with a trusted helper managing the bakery when she was away. As the festivities wound down, Caleb found a quiet moment with his new wife, drawing her away from the well-wishers to a corner of the room. Happy? He asked, his arm around her waist. Completely, she assured him, leaning into his embrace. Though I was thinking about something you said when we first met. What's that? You said there was nothing to go home to except work and memories, she reminded him. Is that still true? Caleb looked at the woman who had brought light back into his life, who had persisted until she'd made him smile again, who now wore his ring on her finger. No, he said with certainty. Now I'm going home to you. And I'll keep feeding you until you smile, she promised, her eyes bright with love and laughter. You've already succeeded, he pointed out, demonstrating with a smile that now came easily to him. Then I'll just have to find new challenges, she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him as their friends and neighbors applauded the newlyweds. As they drove away from the town toward the ranch that would now truly be a home again, Caleb reflected on the unexpected journey that had led him here. 2 years ago, he'd been a man drowning in grief, existing rather than living. Now, beside the woman who had patiently coaxed him back to life with food and understanding, he faced the future with hope and anticipation. The sun set behind the mountains as they traveled, casting long shadows across the trail, but Caleb Keane was no longer afraid of the darkness. With Tabitha beside him, he had found his way back to the light.